Welcome to another video on TCGplayer.com. My name is Steve Rubin. This week we'll be playing a red-black Hollow One deck that I've kind of been piloting in leagues for the last week or two and played it at the Star City Open. This is a deck that, we've seen a lot of different flavors of Hollow One since people have been experimenting with Hollow One in Modern since it's been printed. A lot of those decks, for instance, there's like red-green Vengevine, which is kind of like a zoo deck with Burning Tree Emissary and Vengevine and Hollow One to get your Vengevines back and stuff. But somebody else has been doing well. Axel Foley, shout out, on Moto. I believe he has been kind of 5-0ing some leagues and also went, I don't know if it was a PTQ or PPTQ, he went undefeated and his list got posted, and I've pretty much been working off that. Essentially, your zoo/burn deck, as weird as it looks, pretty much your strategy is to get some undercosted big threats into play and then attack the opponent from weird angles and burn them out. And this is a deck that, I didn't initially think would be good, but for instance, the first 2 leagues I played, I went 3-2, and now, after the last 4 leagues I played, I've 4-1'd all 4 of them, which is kind of insane, honestly. So I think that, the deck is definitely a deck that if you practice it and figure out the play patterns and whatnot and have a good sideboard plan against every deck, it can be pretty powerful. And it's just good enough to kind of be in the thick of things in Modern. So let's get into the deck tech. Right now, I've got 4 Blackleaf Cliffs, 3 Blood Crypt, 4 Bloodstained Mire, 3 Marsh Flats, 2 Mountains, and 2 Swamps. Recently, the only change I made from the Star City list that was posted in a deck tech there was I cut a mountain for Blackleaf Cliffs because while you don't have that many black cards, you side in a lot of black cards, and you also need Bloodghast sometimes to be able to. You need to be able to hardcast Bloodcast a lot of the time, and in that case, you really want double black, which means Blackleaf Cliffs is good. It seems weird to be talking about because in a deck like this, one of the strengths is it has really good mana, being just 2 colors and pretty streamlined. And you say, hey, why wouldn't you play 4 Blackleaf Cliffs? But the reason is because fetch lands are really, really important because you have Gurmag Angler. And fetch lands are also good with Bloodghast. So you kind of want to play as many fetch lands as you can, quote-unquote, fit, like with fetchable sources. And that's why it's kind of a close call. But anyway, 4 Blackleaf Cliffs, 3 Blood Crypts, 4 Bloodstained Mires, obviously, 3 Marsh Flats. If this deck didn't have Blood Moon, you'd probably play red fetches. So that's something to keep in mind. 2 Mountains and 2 Swamps. Basic Swamp is kind of, I'm not going to say greedy, but I think it's possibly correct to only play 1 Swamp because drawing Basic Swamp is really bad because the deck is almost mono red. Because if you look at the main deck, Street Wraith, you never hardcast, and Bloodghast, you hardcast like maybe 10-20% of the time, so it's really just for Angler. But the sideboard is very heavy black, so it's kind of like a weird hedge. But I've been pretty happy with it. Sometimes you draw 1 Swamp or 2 Swamps, and it's really bad for you, so I've been thinking about maybe changing one of these to a Blood Crypt or another fetch land. So anyway, here we have our discard engine. I'll go over this stuff first. Can I move this stuff? Yeah. We have 4 Burning Inquiries, 4 Faithless Looting, 3 Cathartic Reunion. So this is kind of how you get your cards in your graveyard. And all these cards replace themselves, and notably, they make your Hollow One cheap. So Burning Inquiry makes your Hollow One free, and Faithless Looting / Cathartic Reunion make your Hollow One cost 1. Assuming you haven't discarded anything else. It's kind of like a graveyard deck, in a way.
Every day.
Sometimes you're in a situation where you don't necessarily want to go too ham on the discarding, because what ends up happening is if you're like just discarding, you're not really developing your board. For instance, for like a deck like Dredge or a deck like Living End. But what this deck looks to do is you kind of want to use the discard to make a board. So essentially, like, you have Bloodghast, you have Flamewake Phoenix, you have Hollow One, and you have Gurmag Angler. And pretty much while you're fueling your graveyard, it lets you kind of come back by getting threats into play. And that's kind of how the mechanics of the deck work. And of course, you have Flamebane Adept, which is your other threat, which is a card that looks really inconspicuous, and it looks like a card that is weak. It looks like a draft common, honestly. But this is your Delver. Pretty much, if this card didn't exist, I don't think there'd be any reason to play this deck over, for instance, like a red-green Vengevine, like the Zooey version. Because this card Menace is really, really strong. Like, Menace is so many games it equates to unblockable because your opponent can play one creature a turn, but they don't want to leave two creatures back and get blown out by removal. And it's just very hard in Modern for somebody to ever block a Menace creature that effectively. And the Flameblade Adept just gets really big. You know, you have Faithless Looting, makes it a 3-2. Cathartic Greening makes it a 3-2. Burning Inquiry makes it a 4-2, which lets you bring back your Flamewake Phoenix. So Flameblade Adept is awesome, and pretty much whenever you have this on turn 1, you always play it. 4 Bloodghast. Bloodghast is just broken. Like, it's just a free 2-1 that is just insane against control decks, and good against aggro decks too, honestly, because it's just a free threat. That's hard to deal with. Gets haste when they're at 10 or less, which, if there's any deck where that's, like, I've played many dredge decks in my day, and the Bloodghast haste thing is, like, a nice, cute bonus that basically never comes up. This deck is kind of like a burn deck, and that Bloodghast having haste is so important for this deck. It makes this deck so much better. So you're using Bloodghast to full effect. Let's go over, I guess we'll go over the burn last. 3 Flamewake Phoenix, like we said before. This is kind of a card that also looks like it's kind of out of place, but it turns out that a 2-2 Flying Haste is actually pretty good in Modern because not much can just block this for free, and not much can kill this for free. A lot of the removal, like Fatal Push, Bolt, Terminate, Kolaghan's Command, gets this back into the graveyard, which means eventually you can return it with a 4-2 Adept, a Hollow One, or a Gurmag Angler. So, just a good threat, and also like a free card to discard. When you're casting all these Faithless Looting and Cathartic Reunions, you often want to pitch your graveyard cards first, so being able to pitch a Flamewake Phoenix, and then at some point in the game getting it back for free is essentially like drawing a card. And this card gets hardcast a lot. It's pretty good. It's pretty good to hardcast. Lots of games end but with a few Phoenixes just chipping away. 4 Street Wraith, just why not? Every Modern deck should probably play 4 Street Wraith. It's just a broken Magic card, breaks the rules of Magic. Gives you discard, gives you creatures in your graveyard, fills your graveyard, makes your Hollow One 1 cheaper, or 2 cheaper per. 4 Hollow One, obviously the namesake of the deck, but the deck is doing a lot of different things at once. So Hollow One is just kind of another creature. It's your best threat because it's the most efficient. But I guess, you know what? I'm going to take that. It's not your best threat. It's just one of those decks, very similar to like Blue-White Delver, where like every card at some point is your best card because it's just a very well put together synergistic deck. Like sometimes the Flamewake Phoenix, sometimes the Bloodghast, sometimes the Adept, sometimes the Angler is the best threat. The Hollow One is just gives you those really, really broken draws. Gurmag Angler, very similar to Hollow One, honestly, in this deck. Like 1 mana, huge guy that gets around most of the removal of the format. At one point, I played some more Delve creatures, but you generally can't Delve. You have a lot of card selection, so you can get rid of early Anglers, but it's pretty hard to Delve twice that efficiently, so you just play 4. And then the Burn package. This is kind of what this is the main reason that I think that this specific version is superior to other Hollow One decks, is not only do you have more removal, so you can kind of play Magic more, but you just have a ton of reach. So, like, you do your thing really quickly. If your opponent is able to deal with it, so many games end by just burning them out. And Fiery Temper is just an awesome free roll that sometimes you get to Madness. It actually doesn't happen very often, but the fact that you have kind of free slots because you're discarding a lot of your cards anyway makes Fiery Temper excellent. Lightning Bolt, just an insane Magic card. Probably should play it in every red deck ever, especially one that's attacking. And that's the main deck. Pretty straightforward, like pretty much all 4 ofs, except you have 3 Reunions and 3 Phoenix. Let's get into the sideboard. And now this sideboard, I'm gonna say that I hope that this sideboard looks pretty clean to you guys because this is like 6 leagues worth of tuning. So if you're just starting off in this deck and you see the deck list and you're like, oh, I'm not sure about like the random Shattering Spree, or I'm not sure about having so many big game hunters. You know, and you want to like, because that's what I do when I see a list. I see things I don't like, and I tweak them. And not to be rude, but if you want to start playing this deck, I would play this exact sideboard and work from there. Just try it out first, because this has kind of been really hammered in. Like, for instance, normally when I do a video, like after I've done an event with a deck, I'll change some stuff, but I just literally didn't change anything. So let's go over it. 2 Fatal Push. A Fatal Push is important because there are a lot of matchups where Fiery Temper and Bolt don't actually like kill their things. Like, we're talking about Tarmogoyf decks, Scavenging Ooze, Grim Flayer kind of decks. Even decks like Merfolk have random like Master of Waves and stuff like that. Not to mention, sometimes you just want more Vindicate effects. And for a graveyard deck, this deck really plays a fair game. And Fatal Push is kind of just like a turn. You know, it's just a really good removal spell in Modern. Kills a lot of different things. If you play against a deck like Infect or whatever, having a non-damage based removal spell is pretty awesome. Or if you play against like Vizier company decks, having more removal is great. So Fatal Push is great. I honestly wish I could have more, but your sideboard is stretched pretty thin. 2 Blood Moons. So Blood Moon is interesting because this card, it's not like we're playing like a Blue Moon deck and we're just boarding this in against like pretty much any deck, which is a trap that people fall into with Blood Moon. This card is here for Valakut and for Eldrazi slash and you know, that's kind of why it's there to crush to be like the haymaker against those decks. And it's also there so you have more cards against control decks, because a lot of the times you play against like a blue-white-red deck or even like a Grixis control deck maybe, where your bolts aren't really that good because they don't kill anything, and you have a lot like 4 bolts to side out or whatever, and you need enough cards in your sideboard. And Blood Moon is just good enough because in this deck you have a lot of, you know, with the lootings and with the reunion, you have a lot of control over your draws, and like you have a lot of card replacement, so you can like not only can you find your Blood Moon, but if you draw it and it's not good, you can just kind of discard it for free. So it's pretty darn good in this deck. Also, like, you know, is the kind of card where, like I said, you don't board it in against some of these decks, but if I play against like an Abzan deck, it's the kind of card where I'll probably have this in my deck on the play and then not on the draw. Or like if they see it in game 2, I'll just side it out in game 3, because I kind of want to like get them with it and not necessarily rely on it. It's not really like a ABC, like it's not like your plan A. You're still trying to do what your deck does. So that's kind of why the Blood Moons are there. Hopefully that helps you guys out. Like, you know, beat the Tron players, beat the Valakut players, and then maybe Mize against like Jeskai players. 3 Leyline of Void. So this is kind of like the Jerry T special, 3 Leyline of Void. And this is the I would say the weakest card in the sideboard. And the reason why, like, you say, oh, you don't play 4 ley lines, and it's like, yeah, it's pretty important to have some graveyard hate generally in Modern. If you play against like a Living End deck, or if you play against a Dredge deck, I guess is the most popular deck, Leyline of Void is insanely good. And it's very narrow, or like a Goryo's deck, but against those decks, it is pretty good. And with a deck like this, it's kind of weird because you have a lot of card draw, so you can actually like find, if you play like Nihil Spellbomb or whatever, you can actually find it, but you have a lot of card discards, so you actually don't mind drawing the ley line because you can discard it, which is why we play it. The other reason is that Storm is pretty popular right now, maybe the most popular deck in Modern, behind like random Jeskai, that for some reason everyone plays random Jeskai. It's like everyone's favorite deck. But my problem is, if you play against a good Storm player, they're going to bring and empty the Warrens, and this deck doesn't have a sweeper. So, like, yeah, you can leyline them and stop them from passing Flaming you, but when they empty the Warrens for 10, like, it doesn't actually do much. Obviously, you still board it in against Storm and hope to, like, Mize them, but since it's not insane in that matchup, it's kind of it's a 3-of, and the card that I'm looking to cut from my sideboard for other things. 1 Shattering Spree, and this is kind of like the other things category, is the 1 Shattering Spree. I might want another Ancient Grudge or Shattering Spree if I cut another ley line or whatever, but Shattering Spree is just there so you can kill Bridge, so you can kill things from Affinity. If you play against any random like traditional Eldrazi deck. I don't think it's great against Eldrazi Tron, but it can kill Chalice by replicating. It's just like a big whammy card. A lot of the modalists play 3 Ancient Grudge, but I played without Ancient Grudge and have beaten Affinity more often than not. Like, I think the Affinity matchup's pretty good just because you generally put a bunch of stuff into play and then have like a bunch of 1-mana removal spells. So that's kind of why there's one Shattering Spree. It just feels nice to have, especially with a card that, like I said, the deck can draw a lot of cards. So being able to actually draw into and out for Shattering Spree and blowing out a deck. I played against a lot of the new Lantern deck with Whir Invention on Moto, which is one of the reasons that at the Open I wanted to like figure out how to play more Ancient Grudges, but it was not to be, and we have one Shattering Spree. Also has other random applications. Like at the Open, I sided this in against a, not as good as Ancient Grudge, but I sided it in against a Ad Nauseam deck and actually like won a game off of it. So that's the Shattering Spree, pretty self-explanatory. But one, just because it's like your Shatterstorm, it's like your one big blowout card against artifact decks. 3, Big Game Hunter. So this is kind of like my innovation for this deck besides Blood Moon. And I'm going to tell you right now that Big Game Hunter is like basically the reason that this deck is good against Grixis Death Shadow, which is kind of the de facto like deck to beat. Because it just kills all their threats. It kills Tasigur. It kills Death Shadow. Oftentimes, just hard casting this is going to be good, which is what happens, because against them, like, you have to be fast, but the trick is, like, they just go so low on life that as long as you can keep 1 or 2 threats off the board, you'll be good, because Bloodghast is insane against them, and Angler is insane against them. So this card is pretty much because of Grixis Death Shadow in the sideboard, but it's also really good against Eldrazi Tron, because it can kill Reality Smasher, Endbringer, Thought-Knot Seer for free, and it also is good against green-black Tarmogoyf decks. Like, just being able to kill a Tarmogoyf, a Grimflare, an Ooze, or like random Rhino is just very, very good, essentially because sometimes you get to Madness it, which makes it even better. So now the discard, so 2 Thoughtseize. It's a bit light on Thoughtseize because there are a lot of matchups in Modern where you want this Thoughtseize. Like any combo deck, pretty much you want the Thoughtseize. Any deck where like your Bolts and Tempers are kind of dead, like you're going to be boarding in Thoughtseize. But I've found that Burning Inquiry and Thoughtseize just don't really work that well together because, you can Thoughtseize them, but then if you Burning Inquiry afterwards, they're just kind of like going through their deck and have a much different hand. And it's good to Thoughtseize them right after an Inquiry, but you can't always control it. So a lot of times when I board in Thoughtseize and Brutality, like all the discard, I'll board out some Inquiries because they just don't work that well together, which is kind of why I only have 2. The other reason is the sideboard is just very stretched, and I want Brutality because Brutality is your like ace in the hole against Burn, Collected Company, and Infect. It's better against Infect and Burn than Collected Company, but it's insane against Burn, which just like you always seem to play against Burn. And honestly, if you're like local meta or whatever, wherever you're playing this deck, and there's Burn, like I would play 3 or 4 Collected Companies and not play, Collected Brutalities and not play Leyline because it's just so insane against Burn. But it's also good against Infect and Company because against Company, like you need to keep Devoted Druid off the board. And obviously, they board in Path against you, so the ability to like rip Paths and Collected Companies out of their hand and kill their guys is really good. You say like, oh, this card seems like a card that you could like maybe main deck or play even more of, but this deck you really need to like all the card drawing replace themselves, and this isn't like a Haunted Dead like standard deck where you like can play off of like 1 or 2 cards. You want to have a lot of cards, so like when you're playing Faithless Looting and Inquiry, like everything goes well. So that's the sideboard. Sorry for going on the huge tangent about the sideboard without talking that much about the main deck, but pretty much every card is there for a reason, and like the numbers are at this point pretty calculated. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the league.